Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Wednesday, where finally, after a few detours, I am back at the Norton Anthology of Poetry. I found this thing dirt cheap. I've spent a lot of time in it and really enjoying it. I have an interesting poem for you today from the 20th century. It doesn't always happen. This is the poet Richard Wilbur. And this poem is called, it's from 1950, and it's called The Pardon. My dog lay dead 5 days without a grave, in the thick of summer, hid in a clump of pine, and a jungle of grass and honeysuckle vine. I, who had loved him while he kept alive, went only close enough to where he was to sniff the heavy honeysuckle smell, twined with another odor heavier still, and hear the flies' intolerant buzz. Well, I was 10 and very much afraid. In my kind world, the dead were out of range, and I could not forgive the sad or strange in beast or man. My father took the spade and buried him. Last night I saw the grass slowly divide. It was the same scene, but now it glowed a fierce and mortal green, and saw the dog emerging. I confess I felt afraid again, but still he came, in the carnal sun, clothed in a hymn of flies, and death was breeding in his lively eyes. I started in to cry and call his name, asking forgiveness of his tongueless head. I dreamt the past was never past redeeming, but whether this was false or honest dreaming, I beg death's pardon now and mourn the dead. It's an interesting phenomenon. I confess that it's a good poem. It's a little stately in its way. I'm not 100% sure why poets like Richard Wilbur are so heavily represented in an anthology that doesn't have any Elizabeth Bishop, doesn't have any Anne Sexton, or barely any. Not 100% sure why that is. It could just be mid-century misogyny, but at least it is a standard forthright poem. There's none of the weird through the looking glass you had to be there type incunabula that was by 1950 was heavily encrusting poetry in the world and would eventually take it over completely like some sort of mind rot insect. In other words, you can tell what the poem's about, so you can concentrate on how it's done. This is done in a fairly stately kind of way. There are end rhymes that are there more for the reading again than the speaking. It's not possible to stress the rhymes while speaking this unless you make gibberish of it. And the same thing is true with the line breaks. There are line breaks between stanzas that are in mid-sentence, and there's no way to aspirate that. You just have to read it. And it chronicles a phenomenon that I confess is the reason why I picked this poem for today, because as some of you will know if you watch this channel, I don't particularly like to sleep. I don't know why anybody does. It's a very, very unpleasant experience. And invariably, when I do sleep, one of the most unpleasant things happens, as I imagine happens often to you unless you're very young, which is that dreaming is the way that your brain processes memories and also speaks. It also speaks. It doesn't have any words. Your dreaming brain doesn't have any words. All it has is images and emotions from your past, the things that are already in it. It's an organ of thinking. It can't think on its own. So you can make words. If you are feeling, a pressure in the pit of your stomach all day long, so that right before supper time you think, well, something's bothering me. Something's been nagging at me all day. I don't know right what it is, but instead of going straight on to the supper, I'm going to walk around outside for a bit and see if I can get to it. See if I can figure out what's bothering me. What is it that's bothering me? I wasn't feeling this way yesterday. You can do that with your brain as a tool. Your brain doesn't have that tool because it is a tool. So it responds to those kinds of preoccupations by throwing up memories and mixing them together into the illusion of things that didn't really happen, hence prescient dreams and whatnot. And that happens, and you're wide open. When that happens in your dreams at night, you are wide open. You don't have any of the mental defenses to guard your emotions. Your emotions are just helplessly vulnerable on the surface when you're dreaming, which is why dreams have such an enormous effect emotionally. It's why you can wake up incredibly happy or bawling your eyes out. Over something that the mere thought of it during the day, the thought in your brain processed through the way you think, would not cause you to burst into tears. It's one of the many reasons why I hate sleeping. And that happened to me during my brief time of sleeping this morning. Uh, I I had a dream. It had enormous amounts of detail that I don't remember, uh, and but the central theme of it I do remember, which is my Basset Hound Lucy. Some of you who have been with this channel long enough will remember her. She was in my videos when I started my channel, and in that dream, the snippet of it that I remember, I was in the present day, but she had returned. In the dream, I and everyone else had somehow been mistaken that she had died. But we were in the present day, which doesn't make any sense at all. She would be far, far, far beyond the outer limit of her breed's age. It's not possible to be, but it happened anyway. And in the dream, I was, of course, happy to see her. I was happy to smooch her enormous face and grab big handfuls of her flab. And uh, and then I woke up. And in the dream, I had been accommodating. In the dream, I had thought, well, despite how unusual it is for everyone to be wrong, despite the fact that it's kind of weird, it's been a long time, years since she died. Now she's suddenly trundling back into the room. Despite all of that, I'm happy. I'm so happy to see her that I will, of course, accommodate. I will, of course, accommodate reality. I'll make sure that Frida's okay with that. I'll get a second dog bowl and make sure I have her favorite food. And we'll have to change the way we walk because Frida and I bustle along, and Lucy can't do that. She couldn't do it even when she was a baby. Uh, I was making all of those accommodations when suddenly I woke up and just sat there, realizing that none of that is true, that none of that happened, that none of that is ever going to happen. Uh, and so it was that dream that partially led me to this poem. This poem is maybe about something else, although I have a question for you. I love talking about poetry as well as reading it to you. And I'm curious to know here. In the final stanza, the narrator of the poem says, asking forgiveness of his tongueless head, I dreamt the past was never past redeeming. But whether this was false or honest dreaming, I beg death's pardon now and mourn the dead. What do you suppose that means? What is the pardon of the title of this poem? What pardon is the narrator seeking? That he didn't bury his dog? That he resented the fact that his dog died in the woods? Just that he found the dead body? What is it that he thinks that the narrator thinks he didn't do? That he now has asked pardon for? And that maybe he thinks the dog is coming to him in a dream in order to solicit a pardon for? What is it? I don't see any fault in this poem. And it must be something obvious that I'm just missing. Is it that the small child version of the narrator didn't do enough, and the older narrator thinks it has always bothered him that I didn't do enough, that I didn't bury my own dog, that I didn't go and see him, maybe that I didn't know he was dying? Curious to know, what do you make of that? That is Richard Wilbur, not an A-list poet, but in my opinion, not an A-list poet. Certainly not a poet who deserves as much representation in this volume as he gets. But I guess he was alive and a big name at the time that this anthology came out, so maybe that was the reason. But anyway, that's your poem for today, plus bloviating. That is The Pardon, a poem about a thing that I bet a lot of the dog people out there know quite well, which is that the dogs come back to you in your dreams. There's no way around it. There's no way to avoid it, and there's no way to mitigate the emotional impact either, good or ill. Like, for instance, this morning when I realized I was sitting there in bed and realized, okay, that was a dream. It felt completely real because the parts of your brain that you use to determine what feels completely real are totally in the palette of your dreaming mind. It can use those parts to give it the sensation of feeling real. Even once I thought that, and my heart broke a little because Frida never met Lucy, because Lucy is not here. I miss her every day. Even with the sadness of that, there was still happiness that I got to see her, so to speak, one more time. And I'm sure that there are dog owners out there who felt the same, who've had similar experiences. And this poem, I think, partially nods in that direction. I feel certain that the poem originates not from Wilbur obsessing over this old guilt of his, but rather because he had a dream like that and decided to write a poem about it. I feel certain of that. But that's your poem for today, plus bloviating. We'll be back next time for more poetry. Thank you, BookTube.